Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's podcast is going to be a long one. I wanted to try to get all this information into one podcast because it all goes along together. And I think if I draw it out amongst too many podcasts, I don't know, I wanted to kind of make like a blitz through it, and then that way you guys could use this single podcast as your reference, and then you can kind of mark in different times. So about which areas we talk about. So what we're going to be discussing is improving weaknesses in the squat, bench, and deadlift. So this was a topic requested by a listener, and what they really wanted to know was specific to exercise variations that would help them improve their weaknesses. Now, there are generally 3 ways for us to get stronger at a movement, and we did podcast number 102, titled 3 Ways to Progress in Strength. And what they are is physical strength development, technical strength development, and mental strength development. So too often when people think about getting stronger, they only think of physical strength. They don't pay attention to the need to improve their technique, and they don't think about the mental aspects of, okay, why am I missing big weights? You know, am I psyching myself up too much? Am I psyching myself up not enough? Am I overstressing and getting overcomplicated and focusing too much on cues, and that's ruining my speed? So there's a lot of mental aspects that can impair our performance when we look at top-end strength. And technique strength is 100% the first place and the most important place for everyone to look. When you need to get stronger in a movement, you must look at technique. So the person asked in this podcast for physical development information. So specifically exercise variations. However, that is not the place to look. Okay? So I'm about to give you a really lot of information, and it isn't even the best information. So the best way to get stronger is to be more efficient in displaying your strength. So you want to get technique strength first. That's the first place to look at. That's the most important place to look at. That is where you look. Because if you can express your current strength better, you'll better be able to express your strength for the rest of your life. Also, if you can express your strength in the safest positions, you'll be less risk of injury. So too often people just try to get physically stronger over top of a shitty technique base, and they eventually get injured, they eventually hit plateaus, and they wonder why they can't move forward anymore. And the reason why is you can only physically develop crap technique to some limit. You have to eventually get better technique. So everything I'm about to say in this podcast is meaningless if you do not pursue better technique. Now, better technique is extremely hard to explain verbally through any kind of a podcast. So you have to have somebody physically look at the way you move. Everyone moves differently because everyone is different. We all have different bone lengths. We all have different muscle balances. So the ways our body prefers to move. So I would absolutely 100% suggest, if you are serious about trying to get better at strength, is to go get someone to look at your lifts. So go get a trainer or somebody who is experienced working with multiple populations and multiple types of body builds. So do not go get the strongest guy in your gym. So just because they can squat, bench, or deadlift more than everybody else does not mean they know how to get you to squat, bench, or deadlift more than everybody else. So overwhelmingly, that's the biggest mistake people make when they look for technique development information, is they go to somebody who is strong, assuming they know how to make you strong. That's absolutely not true. So overwhelmingly, I've seen over the years where just because somebody is strong doesn't mean they're going to be a good teacher. So what tends to happen is if they squat a certain way, they're going to tell everybody to squat the way that they squat. If they deadlift a certain way, they're going to tell everybody to deadlift the way that they deadlift. And that is not correct for everyone. So that is super, super, super important, is do not get the strongest guy in your gym to get you to help. Okay, get the most educated, the most experienced working with multiple populations. So that means you got to do a little bit of homework. You got to go see, what trainers are in your local area. Who have they trained with? What have they worked with? So you want to have somebody who has a wide variety of populations that they've worked with. They're going to be able to help you more than just some brute strong male or female who knew what worked for them, but they don't know what's going to work for you. So I can't overemphasize this enough. Technique is the first place to look. And when you're going to get technique information, do not ask the strongest person you know. Ask the most intelligent in the conceptual knowledge that you're going to need. Ask the person who has the most well-versed background in a variety of body types and positions. So, for example, this is not an advocate commercial for myself, but it is a good example, is I squat, bench, and deadlift a certain way for me. And it has changed over the years. So I'm weighing now about 155, 160 pounds. I'm actually on a diet. So, but I've been as high as 295. And when I graduated high school, I only weighed 185 pounds. It was a pudgy 185. It wasn't even a muscular 185. So I've gained over 100 pounds in my body. And that has changed how I needed to position myself through all the years. And then also I've had various injuries. So I've had to learn how to squat different ways. So I've squatted low bar, high bar. I've squatted low bar and high bar in flats, or low bar and high bar in Olympic lifting shoes. I've benched where it was a chest dominant bench. I've benched where it's a tricep dominant bench. I've benched with a high arch, benched with a low arch. I've deadlifted sumo conventional. So it's just in my lifetime, for my body has changed, my life has changed. So I needed to know a lot of varieties just for my own self. Okay? So you're going to need somebody who understands those variances. So if they squat a certain way and they tell you that's the way that you should squat, you better damn well be built exactly like they are. Otherwise, it's not correct. Okay? If they tell you to bench a certain way, you better be damn well built the exact same way they are. Otherwise, it's not correct. And the same thing for deadlift. So if they do deadlift with, let's just say they lift their head up to the ceiling when they deadlift, that's overwhelmingly a horrible advice for somebody who does conventional deadlifts, is to have your chin up and extended, because it's going to pull everything out of place. You're going to end up starting your deadlift almost in a pulling motion rather than a pushing off the floor motion. So when you do a conventional deadlift, you need to drive with your feet up off the floor, not pull the bar up using your head as the first thing you're moving. That's the dumbest thing in the world. Your feet are connected to the ground. Start with your feet, not your head. Okay? So, all with that said is I can't stress enough how everything I'm about to say will be absolutely meaningless if you don't have good technique. So go get someone to help you with technique. Okay? That's where the first place you want to look. Now, okay, so now I got through that. The person who asked for this information, they said in general that they believe in the theory that you are only as strong as your weakest link. So I can only squat, bench, or deadlift as much as the weakest area or spot of those lifts is. So if I'm weakest at the bottom of the lift, I can only lift in the middle and the top whatever I could lift at the bottom. And that's the same of other positions. So if I have weak chest, I can only bench as much as my chest will allow. Even if I have stronger triceps and shoulders, like front delts, it won't matter because I can only express my strength through the weakest area or the weakest muscle. So that is pretty much true. So what they wanted to know was they understood that isolation work is important. So if I want to get a bigger bench, I do have to work on my chest. I have to work on my front delts. I have to work on my biceps, my triceps, my upper back. There's a lot of muscles that I need to individually train. But their question is specific to exercise variations. So they want to know the variations of the bench press that'll help them with different positional weaknesses. So we're going to go through that. But I wanted to emphasize that if you need to get stronger at one of these lifts, you need to be looking at your isolative movements. So overwhelmingly, what I spend most of my time programming for clients is the isolative movements. So they'll come in, they'll do a warm-up, they'll do their main lift, and then they typically have anywhere from 3 up to 6, maybe even sometimes more, exercises after the main lift that are isolative movements related to the weaknesses of their main lift. So if you think about, like, they might have anywhere from 1, 2, 5. So they might have anywhere from 5 to 10 components of their workout, and only one of those components is the main lift itself. Okay? So you can switch the variation of the main lift, and that might help. But that's only one out of 5 to 10 components of what your whole entire workout is incorporating. So overwhelmingly, people dismiss technique. And overwhelmingly, people dismiss the benefit of isolative movements, where you're trying to isolate a joint, or you're trying to isolate a muscle through a specific range of motion. those are absolutely going to be the most important ways for you to develop strength and keep you the safest from injury, because they allow you to attack your weaknesses with the lowest amount of joint stress. So the more you can improve through technique, the more you can improve it through isolative movements. And again, that's isolative to a hip, like to a joint or to a muscle. The more you can improve through those, you will get stronger and safer. You'll reduce injury and you'll be able to lift longer. So I've had clients who've progressed from meet to meet to meet over years. Like we've done, at one client we did 10 meets and they got better at every single meet. So for 10 meets in a row, they've hit PRs. So that's the goal. No injuries, knock on wood, except for a couple little bumps and bruises and small things here and there, but nothing that we couldn't fix within about a month. And they've progressed 10 meets in a row. Okay? So that's what you want to do. You want to be in this for the long haul. Don't try to get super strong now, but rip your body to shreds. Okay? Don't do that. So, the best ways to avoid doing that is to look at technique first, and then look at your isolative accessory style movements. So your accessory movements are insanely, insanely important. I would argue they're more important than the main lift for most people. So for most people, when they say they're kind of short on time, I tell them to get, unless they're high level elite and there's certain situations. But for most people, I'd rather they skip the squats and do all the accessories. They can catch the squats next workout and still be able to move forward. If all they do is hit their squats, but they don't hit any of the accessories, they're missing the things that really build up their weaknesses. Okay? So, technique, 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 and then pay attention to your small, isolative accessories. Now, with all of that said, I'm about to give you a podcast that's based on neither of those. But I want to answer the question that the person had. But I want them to understand where this answer ranks in levels of importance. Okay? So we've talked about diet, where calories is the most important. Your balance of macronutrients is the second most important, how much protein, carbs, and fats. Then you have meal timing, and then you have micronutrient quality, or macronutrient quality. So what are the types of carbs I'm having? What are the types of fats I'm having? The types of proteins. The same thing applies to training when you're training for strength. Okay? So the type of squat you're doing is way the hell down the list. The most important is technique. The second most important is probably, I haven't really thought about ranking these out until right now I'm talking. But technique is absolutely most important. And then I would say the next most important thing is finding out what your weaknesses are and then attacking them with the lowest weight-loaded movement, accessory style movement you can find. Because that builds up the weakness as fast as possible. You can train it more frequently. You can get a higher amount of volume on it. And you can protect joints. So that's the most important. And then third or fourth or whatever down the list is these exercise variations. So these are not as important as people think. Not anywhere near as important as what they think. Okay? Technique first. Then your isolative movement style accessories is next most important. Now that I've gone through all that, let's go through and give you some guys and girls. Let's give you some exercises you can do to target different areas of your main movements. So when you do squat, what kind of squat is best for you? Now, this is going to be without me getting to see anything about the way you're lifting, so I can't improve your technique. Because, for example, if we're going to look at this and we're saying, okay, well, let's look at the lifts, squat, bench, deadlift, and am I weak at the bottom? Am I weak in the middle of the range? Or am I weak at the lockout or the top of the range? All of those are dependent on your technique. If you have improper technique, it'll show up in one of those places, and you'll think you have physical weakness when you're actually positionally incorrect. Okay? So let's go through this. This is going to be a long one, but again, let's invest into it. So if you really do give a shit about this, you're going to be willing to listen to this whole podcast. If you don't, and you're already kind of tuning out, well then, good luck to you. So if you can't handle, a little bit of time invested into getting better, then you're screwed. So let's look at the squat. Now, if you're weak at the bottom of the squat, okay, and if you want to mark your timer, this is going to be what, like around 14 minutes? So that's when the squat starts. So we'll start here at 14 minutes and 30 seconds. Go. Okay, so squats. If you're weak at the bottom, you have to make sure that your positioning is correct and your muscle awareness and muscle cues are correct. So you might not be bracing your hips properly. So maybe you're one of those bottom-out squatters. So rather than stopping at parallel, you just kind of drop into your hamstrings and glutes and lower back and everything. So if you're an Olympic lifter or CrossFitter, coming into the strength world, you will have to get rid of that drop down squat. Okay, now there are people who can do it, but that's very few. Okay, most best strength athletes are going to have hip positional control at parallel, so they will not bottom out and drop inches below parallel to be able to come back up and do amazing things. It does happen. Okay, that's absolutely true. It does happen, but it's not likely that it will be the best for most people. Now you can try it, see what you do, and then also try what I'm about to tell you now and see if that's any better. So, not bracing your hips properly. So that can be achieved by trying to split the floor with your feet, like you're trying to rip the floor in half, left to right, and then also breathing properly and proper bracing of your abdomen. So again, this all falls under technique. This is stuff that you'd have to address in your technique. But if you don't have your hips braced and you don't have your breathing braced properly, you're going to suck at the bottom of a squat, and it'll have nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with physical development. It'll have everything to do with technique. Okay? Now, what if you have good technique? That's a huge ass assumption, by the way. So what if you do have good technique? Pause squats are very good. So you just go down to parallel, pause for the various counts. I've done various times, and then come back up can help. So we've also done slowed eccentrics into pauses. So they might do a 3 count down, 3 count pause, and then just explode up as fast as you can. By doing the slowed eccentric on the way down, it allows you to pay attention to your positional controls. So maybe if you go slow enough down, if you feel yourself drifting into your toes, you can prevent that. If you feel yourself losing hip tightness, you can prevent that. If you feel yourself losing abdominal bracing, you can prevent that. So doing slowed eccentrics gives you more body awareness. So that way, by the time you reach parallel, you reach the bottom of the squat, you're still in a good, safe, strong position. Okay? So super duper helpful to do slowed eccentrics. You can do various speeds. So I've had people do like a 5 count eccentric into a 3 count pause. The very next rep, they'll do a 4 count eccentric into a 2 count pause. The next one will do a 3 count eccentric into a 1 count pause, and then a 2 and none. So they kind of like speed up the eccentric and the pause each rep. Sometimes we'll do that each workout. So maybe one workout they do a 5 and 3, next workout they do 4 and 2, next workout 3 and 1, next workout normal competition style squats. So you can vary it and progress it in different ways. But you want to make sure your progressions are set up to allow for increased weight load over the course of your program. So you might do a 3-week program, 4-week program, but you want to have progressive overload with weight, not volume, but progressive overload with weight. So that way you'll actually get stronger from this. So if you progress through volume, you will not get stronger. You'll get bigger muscles, but you won't get stronger. So you have to make sure that you're progressing in the right manner. So you might be doing the right type of variation of movement, but you're not going to progress the way that you want because you don't have your progressions set up, correctly. So we did a podcast number 70 called, it's a training podcast, Importance of Progression. So podcast number 70. That one will explain what is the right way to progress for strength. Okay? So you can be doing pause squats, which is the right thing to do, but if you're progressing in volume, you're messing up. You're going to get better at bodybuilding, you're not going to get better at strength. Okay? Now, maybe you need more muscle, and that will help, but you have to know what you're actually aiming for. Okay? This is why you have people rate your program sometimes, because all this stuff is ridiculously important, and there's a lot of it to go on. Now, you can also do box squats, and they're great for building explosiveness out of the bottom. So again, you can do a controlled eccentric. You can pause on the box and then try to drive up off that. That'll teach you how to explode out of the bottom. Okay. You can also do tempo squats, which is kind of variations of eccentrics and pauses. So you might do a 5 count down, 5 count up, 4 count down, 4 count up, 3 count down, 3 count up, 2 count down, 2 count up. And that, again, will give you awareness of positions and also giving you kind of more time and attention to help you develop the strength in that. You can also do dead squats from parallel. So that would be where you have the hard supports of a squat rack set up to where you're at parallel. Okay? And then from there, you're going to try to drive up out of the bottom of the squat. So there's no eccentric. You just line up underneath the bar, get yourself in good position, and try to drive up. So, overwhelmingly, I can't stand dead stop squats. they're not applicable, in my opinion. There's going to be a ton of people who disagree with me. And there's going to be a ton of people who say that they got results from them. And that could be true. They could also be that they're not controlling it, all the variables. So maybe they just got better because they took a program that gave more attention to squatting, and all of a sudden they got better. Okay? So the reason why I don't like dead squats is you're getting under the bar in a really crappy, horrible position. You're trying to find tightness. You're trying to find all this position, and then you drive up out of there. That isn't how you get to parallel. So I would rather practice getting to parallel correctly and then creating force development rather than having to find a manufactured artificial way to get to parallel, kind of fake the position and try to move up from there. It's the same reason why I'm not a big fan of rack pulls for deadlifts or board presses for bench pressing, because they don't mimic the real way in which you get into those positions. Okay? So an elevated pull for a deadlift, it's a great way to minimize leg development, like minimize leg involvement if you want to overload your glutes and lower back, but it's not good for technique proficiency. So a rack pull will not help you with technique because you don't get to start a deadlift from the middle of it. You have to start a deadlift from the floor. So I prefer to do variations with my clients and in my own training that mimic as much of normal full range of motion as possible. And then we're just trying to change the positional requirements and or the speed requirements around where we want to get better. But they have to go through the full range of motion or all the normal stuff of a lift. So now I have trained people for elite totals, a bunch of them. I've trained people for national records, like obviously state records, a bunch of really good stuff. So I've trained really high level people. So what I'm about to tell you isn't like I'm full of crap and I don't really know the truth. So there are reasons why certain people like board presses. There are certain reasons why people like elevated deadlifts. But understanding what is the bang for your buck. So an elevated deadlift is good for overloading your, depending on where you elevate it to, but the height that you elevate it to is good for overloading, say, like upper back, lower back, and glutes, and maybe hamstrings, depending on where you elevate it to. But you're going to get physical overall development, but you're not getting any technique reinforcement. Why not do something that does both? Okay? So that doesn't make any sense. It's better for you to band a deadlift from the top of the rack to where the bottom is lighter, and then as you lift up through the full range of motion, it gets heavier towards the top. That's what you really want with a band, like a rack pull anyhow, is to overload the top of the motion. Well, why not get a full range of motion to work on all the technique aspects and get that overload? Rather than just doing a rack pull where you start from some bullshit position because you're anchoring yourself into it in a way that wouldn't mimic if you drove the bar off the floor. And now all of a sudden you get to look all cool and be the big man on campus, and look like you're doing rack pulls with like 585 or 675 or something when you can't even get 405 off the damn floor. That's stupid. Absolutely stupid. So we want to make sure we pick variations that allow us to have the fullest range of motion, the most natural range of motion and techniques, but they just happen to emphasize the areas that you want to emphasize. Okay? So as we go through all this, I'm trying to make sure that I list the things that are available to you, but I also want to tell you what not to waste your time on. Okay? Now, you can decide to try the things that I say don't. Absolutely fine. That's how I learned that they were crap. So I learned them for myself. I learned them with programming for my first ever clients. When I first ever did programming and stuff, I would tell them, like, hey, we're going to try this for a 4-week block. I didn't really like it, but let's see what you think and let's see how your feelings are. Then all of a sudden they wouldn't like it either. They wouldn't get much from it. After doing that for a couple people, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 people, all of a sudden you realize, okay, that's a pretty big waste of time. I'm going to stop ruining everybody's 4 weeks, and I'm just going to assume that exercise isn't that great. And that's actually the truth of it. So over the years of doing this, so I've been personal training for 17 years. So for 17 years and over 1,000 clients, I'm well aware of what most often works versus what most often doesn't. And there are so many things in the most often works category that you never even have to dip into the other stuff. So just keep yourself busy with the things that you know works. That'll keep you busy enough, okay? So, if you have the weakness at the bottom of a squat, pause squats or slow descentrics will help. Box squats are great, and tempo squats. Not a big fan of dead squats, okay? Now, weakness at the mid-range of a squat. So what happens if I get down to the bottom, I drive myself up a little bit, and then I'll kind of stall out in the middle. So that, again, is going to be often position. As you went down, you probably drifted forward into your toes. You tried to drive up off the ground and realized that you're all in your quads. You probably are rounded over in your upper back, and that's all going to be related to having the bar drifting in forward above, in front of your mid-range like center of gravity. So mid-foot center of gravity. You're going to be in front of that. And that's going to call on low back and quads. You're not going to be able to really use your hamstrings and glutes much. You're not going to have enough lower back to support that. So it almost turns the squat into a mini good morning. And you're just overloaded probably beyond what you can actually do a good morning with. So it's really important to pay attention to positioning and having proper back tightness. And did you bounce out of the hole? So maybe you dropped to the bottom, you bounced out of the hole, and it shot you forward. Well, then don't bounce out of the hole. You got to pay attention to your positioning. You got to brace the hips. So there's a lot of technique aspects that'll make it look like you're weak in the mid-range when you're not. You're just not in the right position when you get to the mid-range. Okay? Now, what happens if you work the technique and your technique says you're right? Well, then partial or positional pause squats are great. So you would squat down halfway, pause. Go down to parallel. Drive up halfway, pause. Then back up. You can eventually get to where you get rid of the pause on the way up. So you just come down, pause midway, you go down, and then drive up through that mid spot. Okay? So, positional pause squats are awesome. We also have partial range of motion squats. So if somebody's weak in the middle range of the squat, we'll have them squat down to about 2 or 3 inches below that spot. They'll push up to about 2 or 3 inches above that spot, and then just do repetitions just within that small little window. That is a killer way to squat, by the way. But it'll absolutely help your ability within that range by just coming in and out, in and out, in and out of that range, and avoiding the hyper lockout and avoiding the hyper parallel, like the lower parts. Just hit the middle range of motion right around your weakness. Then you do have the option of dead squats, where you set the bar at pins and you kind of squat from the bottom around wherever your weakness is. Again, not a big fan of that. Doesn't seem to work very well. So, number one is position. Make sure your technique is appropriate. Therefore, you won't be weak in the middle position. And then from there, you can do those positional paused squats and also the partial range of motion squats. So just spending more time under tension in the area that you are worse at. Okay, so spend more time where you're weak. That's essentially what all these variations are trying to get to, is how do we expose your weakness even more? How do we make it be known and exaggerated that that's the problem with the lift? And then how do we spend more time under tension in that area? Okay? So, those are going to help the most. Then weak at lockout, it's pretty rare. So most of the time somebody can get through out of the bottom, they can get through the mid-range. They're going to pretty much lock out anything they need to. So maybe they just kind of missed time to quad flex versus their glute flex. So they kind of lost balance a little bit. But if you tend to have that as an issue, definitely pay attention to your technique. Pay attention to whether you're locking out your joints at the same time. So you might be mistiming your hip lockout versus your knee lockout. But you can also squat with bands and chains. So bands and chains allow you to do that overload on the top, and they'll kind of help you improve kind of like you're driving up power into that location. Okay? So that is all the information we're going to give on squats. Now, if you like this information and you want to learn more about it, shoot us an email, and I'll make an individual video just on squats. But I think that's a pretty comprehensive amount. So let's go with that to start with, and now we're going to move into bench. So for those of you listening to the podcast, you're going to have to give me a pause because I'm filming this for YouTube as well, and I want to kind of stop the video on YouTube and restart it again for kind of like a part 2 around bench press. So, hello YouTube, we're going to stop your video right now.